unusual and leading to these really disastrous conditions is that we've seen heavy rainfall and flooding occurring at the same time. So we have flooding happening right now and that heavy rainfall which has continued over the last week. So this makes it particularly unusual and a very dangerous situation that is still very much with us. Now, we are seeing the rain band that's moving across the state, also bringing rainfall over inland parts of New South Wales. So the northwest slopes and plains, we've seen some very heavy rainfall there, around 200 millimetre mark for some location. That is 4 times the monthly average falling in just 24 hours. So again, it's not just the east coast, but also those inland northwest slopes and plains, northern inland areas that are also experiencing flood risk and heavy rainfall. That rain band is currently moving across the state, and a low pressure system will be tracking to the south coast. Now, when that low pressure system comes through later today, we will see heavy rainfall, which is already occurring in the region, but we are expecting heavy falls and that flood risk in the region on the south coast as well. Now, the system is moving quickly and we are already seeing a clearing trend behind that. So we can already see that on the satellite and on our rain radar. So it may seem almost impossible to believe, but we will see blue sky and sunshine just later this afternoon in Western Sydney and on the mid-north coast. Now, it's very important to remember that even though we will have that blue sky and sunshine returning, flooding will be continuing and the flood risk will continue. We also have warnings for damaging winds, and with everything so saturated, it really won't take much to be bringing down potentially trees which can block roads, take down power lines. So again, it's really important to be aware of not just the flood risk, which is very much a key focus, but also those dangerous conditions on the road. We also have a hazardous surf warning, so again, coastal regions, again, strong winds, and damaging conditions there. But again, expecting that clearing trend and the return of some blue skies and conditions, but again, keeping alert even though we will see those clear conditions. Now, I will just pass over to Victoria Dodds to talk us through the current flood situation.
So firstly, my heart goes out to everyone who's been adversely impacted by the unfolding emergency across New South Wales. We've seen extraordinary rainfall that has resulted in extraordinarily large areas of the state go underwater. Currently, we have flood watches and flood warnings in force from the Queensland border all the way down that east coast to Victoria, and we've also got a developing flood situation in inland New South Wales. My colleagues here in Sydney who have been flood forecasting for over 20 years have never seen anything like it. Let's focus on the Hawkesbury-Nepean Valley and what that means for those western suburbs of Sydney. We are seeing a flood peak around the Saxville area, and we're expecting it to peak at Lower Portland this afternoon, a major flood peak of around 7.75 metres. And we're expecting that flood peak to move into the Wiseman's Ferry area later on this afternoon. So a flood peak expected in that lower Hawkesbury River through this afternoon. However, we've seen rain yesterday, it is still raining. We can expect those river levels to continue to remain high for quite some time. So although we're seeing a flood peak, levels will remain high certainly through tomorrow, and it's probably not until we get close to the weekend when we'll start to see these levels recede. So a really protracted flood event for all these residents in the Hawkesbury-Nepean Valley. Let's also take a step back, and as I say, there's flooding happening right across the state. Down these eastern coastal catchments where we've seen these really heavy falls, these catchments tend to respond very quickly. So as that rain clears, the situation could again also improve very, very quickly. However, in western New South Wales, once the rivers get going, they can keep flowing for not just days, but weeks or months on end as the floodwaters make their way through the state into Victoria. Let's focus up in the Queensland border. We had some really heavy rain yesterday, continuing overnight and today. We currently have a major flood warning for the Clarence, so we're expecting major flooding at Grafton overnight. If we move further down the coast to that mid-north coast where we saw the devastating floods over the weekend, Yes, the catchment's saturated, it is responding to further rainfall, but we're certainly not expecting to see anything of the magnitude that we saw over the course of the weekend, particularly for those residents of Tiree, Kempsey. And as that rain clears today, the situation will very quickly improve. Further south to the Hunter Valley, we've also got a major flood warning for Bulga. So again, major flooding occurring across the Hunter Valley through today and into tomorrow. And then right down at that south coast, as that rain band intensifies later today before it clears the state, we're also got a bit of a watching brief on the Bega River in that Victorian border area. I also mentioned we've got emerging or developing floods in inland New South Wales. We currently have major flood warnings for the Upper McIntyre, the major warnings for the Gwydir River, and we're also watching the Clarence. We saw some really phenomenal rainfall totals in the last couple of days, and those flood waters, they will work their way through the system, and we could see floods out west certainly for weeks to come. So in summary, major flooding continuing in the Hawkesbury Nepean, and levels remaining high certainly over the next few days. It's still a very dangerous flood situation. Major flood warnings continuing right down that east coast, but as that rainfall clears through the course of today, the situations start to really significantly improve. And then as we look into western New South Wales, we've really got a developing flood situation, particularly for communities around Murray, and we're expecting the river levels to continue to rise and work way through the system over the next few days, if not weeks on end. So really important, stay vigilant, keep up to date with the latest warnings from the Bureau, follow the advice of the SES to make sure everyone stays safe. Thank you.
You mentioned 1 metre at the exceed. Is there any way you can point out what that might be?
Yes, we had 1,083 millimetres recorded at Mount Seaview, so that's currently the highest rainfall total for this particular flood event. We've also had 1,034 millimetres recorded at Combine, again another location on the mid-north coast.
We have spoken briefly about when this will end, but it varies a lot across the state. You did say that we may get some sunny skies between Sydney and parts of New South Wales later today. So when will this end?
Well, this main system that's moving through, the rain band, is moving across the state, so clearing from the west across the east. So a large part of the state will actually see conditions really ease. So the key day in terms of that heavier rainfall is today, and things will improve. That will mostly be along the larger stretches of the New South Wales coast. We will also see conditions inland also improving. So we may still see some locations getting a bit of activity, maybe a shower or two. The south of the state, more likely to see a bit more rainfall relative to the rest.
So is there any way that it will get worse before it gets better?
So far, conditions with this clearing trend will mean that we'll see improvements across the board. But again, in terms of that flood risk, those inland catchments, as my colleague pointed out, do tend to respond much slower and have those more protracted floods. So just because it's not raining, just because there's clear skies and sunshine, doesn't mean that the flood risk isn't with us.
And is there, we're talking about sunny skies tomorrow, is there any other rain events coming through on the horizon, or is it just going to be kind of clear from here on into the next week or so?
In general, we are expecting clear conditions into the weekend. Again, some locations it might vary. For example, for Canberra, there'll be a mix of some days, being partly cloudy, maybe a shower or two, and a sunnier day. But for the most part, compared to what we've seen over the last 7 days, it's mostly a clearing trend and improved conditions heading into the weekend.
Are you able to give any specific examples of where flood levels may remain high for potentially weeks or months?
I'll pass it to Victoria.
So I mentioned the Hawkesbury Nepean. Whilst you're going to get clear skies, we're expecting levels to continue to remain high for the next few days. So that situation is certainly not going to markedly improve until the end of the week. On the East Coast catchments, once that rain clears, we would expect conditions to improve over the next few days. But certainly in inland New South Wales, the river levels are only really starting to rise, and that's where we can see the levels continue to rise and work their way through the interior of the state over the coming weeks.
And is that because the river's got nowhere to go to, particularly inland? Is there a particular geographical feature about the inland of New South Wales which means it's more prone for long-lasting flood events?
Yeah, so we've obviously got the Great Dividing Range, everything that falls to the east, and those catchments are really quite fast responding. It'll drain straight into the ocean. All the rain that falls to the west, it really is, it kind of meanders slowly through the continent, and a lot of it drains in potentially Lake Eyre or goes into the Murray-Darling Basin. So certainly it takes a long time for the floodwaters to work their way through the state.
So is it good news for like water systems like Murray-Darling and stuff?
It's probably a little bit early to tell, but certainly it's a significant rainfall event, so it will certainly be welcome rain for many.
Question for Agatha. Can you talk a bit about the road conditions? Are we expecting a lot of fog, trees down, that sort of thing?
Well, with this rainfall and the damaging wind warning that we have currently out, there will be a risk of more dangerous and hazardous driving conditions. So again, the soils are very wet. That means that we don't even need particularly strong winds that could possibly bring down trees. That's very dangerous, obviously, if you are driving and there's trees down on the road, but also those trees can take down power lines. So that risk will be with us as we still have those wet catchments and those stronger winds. Now tomorrow there may be some areas of the state that will also see some fog with conditions clearing. So again, being really mindful if you're out on the road that you may not be able to see what conditions and those hazardous conditions on the road. So again, be very careful around road conditions today and into the weekend.
And what about for the ACT? What's the rainfall situation there? Warnings, and how long will the conditions there last?
So still wet conditions currently for the ACT. We're expecting probably another 20 to 30 millimetres to fall today. But again, as that rain band moves across the state from the west out to the east, we will see clearing conditions for the ACT later this afternoon and into the evening.
And we've got hazardous surf along the New South Wales coast. Can you talk about what's driving that and what that means for people who use the coast, like rock fishers, swimmers, boaters?
Well, with those stronger winds and also higher tides, we are seeing some hazardous surf conditions, so up to 5 to 7 metre swells from the east to the northeast. So with that, obviously very dangerous conditions along the coast, particularly for the southeast as that low pressure system moves through and really squeezes those winds, meaning that they're strengthened and more intense, particularly over that area and also into the southwest slopes and plains. Now, in terms of the risks, people like rock fishing, this is really not the day to be heading out there. Just keeping in mind that the hazardous surf conditions are there, but also our emergency services that are really focusing on responding on the current flood situation and trying to support the communities that are really facing these disastrous impacts. So please don't head out and go rock fishing today. And again, being really mindful of those hazardous surf conditions, those damaging winds that are with us today.
Is there any concern about erosion when it comes to the surf conditions that happen to surf?
That's right. So there is, with this hazardous surf and those larger swells, there's certainly potential for erosion. So again, the swell is coming from the east to the northeast. So in terms of that erosion risk, it will be for beaches and areas that are exposed in that particular direction.
So could that include parts of Sydney, Central Coast, or is it further south?
On the south coast is where we are seeing sort of the strongest impacts associated with that hazardous surf and swell. So again, it really depends on location. These are very localized impacts. So it's not just about the exposure of the particular beaches, but some can just be a bit more sensitive to erosion compared to others.
I guess just one more question, touching on something that you were talking about before. We're still seeing, even just recently, more more SES issue sort of evacuation warnings and things like that, including that Horse King area. Can you just talk through why the river level seems to be staying
just had so much rain over the last few days. It's quite a complicated river system, and as I say, we're just seeing all the rivers colliding together and really keeping the levels up. So that's what's really important message to really let the community know that whilst we're seeing peaks on the Hawkesbury Nepean, levels are going to remain high and will still be very dangerous over the coming days.
That's just not going to drop as quickly as people might think.
Yeah, absolutely. The levels will remain high, and it's probably not until the weekend where we really start to see the levels ease. So despite blue skies, the flood risk is still very dangerous over the coming days for the Hawkesbury